Let us pray. O eternal Lord God, from whom alone cometh wisdom and understanding, we beseech thee to direct aright the minds of those who are about to take counsel together on matters pertaining to the common life of this borough of Christchurch, that in all their deliberations and decisions they may faithfully discharge the duties of their office and ever promote the health, safety, and the well-being of those they seek to serve, for the honour and glory of thy holy name. Amen. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen.
In order to assist in the process this evening, I must ask everyone to ensure that their mobile phones are either switched off or on silent mode. We will be grateful if you remain quiet whilst the meeting is in progress. I would like to remind everybody present that this meeting will be filmed by Council and broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. If you are seated in the chamber, it is possible that the cameras will capture your image by your presence. You are deemed to consent to be filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. Finally, there are no planned fire drills this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately via the emergency exit placed in the corner of the chamber and the doors you came through. Item 2, apologies for absence.
Mr. Mayor, we've had no apologies for absence.
Item 3, declarations of interest by members. There are none. We will take item 4, the local government reorganisation in Bournemouth, Dorset and Poole, to update the Council on the decision of the Secretary of State in response to the future of Dorset submission and consider whether to proceed with the local poll and community governance review.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, and good evening to all members. As you mentioned in your introduction, Mr. Mayor, this report's in two parts essentially. The first is about whether or not you wish to run a local poll, and the second is whether or not you wish to conduct a community governance review. I'm going to speak very briefly on the local poll issue, briefly because I think it's been well rehearsed previously, and Richard is going to speak very briefly on the community governance review. So just a reminder, if you need one at all, members, that the local poll was agreed to be run by the Council back in March. That was in anticipation that the Secretary of State would make a decision about local government reorganisation shortly after that. He didn't do, as we well know, and at your meeting in April you chose to defer the running of a poll until such time as he has made a decision. I'm sure it hasn't escaped anyone that he made that decision last Tuesday, that he is minded to support local government reorganisation, and so now it's a matter for you as to whether or not you wish to conduct the poll. The information about the poll is essentially set out in appendices 1 and 2, so that's the proposed ballot paper and information document. You know that the period for making representations to government is short, and it runs until the 8th of January. So my word of caution on this, members, is that if you do wish to run the poll, that it has to essentially be run as it is set out in your agenda tonight. There is no time for making amendments or changing timescales, etc. If you choose to go ahead, just to give you an example, if you choose to go ahead, then this information has to be with our contractors on Tuesday. So there is no flexibility in the system. So, Mr. Mayor, just before I pass over to Richard, just to remind you that the recommendations A to F set out the various decisions that you would have to make if you wish to conduct a poll. And with your permission, I'll now pass over.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members. Just very briefly, in terms of the referendum, can I just clarify one point? On page 7 of your report, the third bullet point down, we indicate that the poll will be conducted by post using the 1st of September electoral register. There is a small opportunity. We need to negotiate this with our supplier, but in order to use the most recent up-to-date register, I'd like that to be changed to the 1st of September or later if possible. Okay, so that we would use the latest register if we possibly can. So that's just one clarification on that part. In terms of the community governance review, Council in August resolved that upon the announcement of an initial minded to decision on the reorganisation of local government in Dorset, that we would commence the process for a community governance review. The first stage of that process for Council is to approve the terms of reference for that review and the timetable. So that's what's before you tonight. There's a lot of detail in the reporting, or some detail in there about the procedure that we will follow. I'm not intending to go through that, but I'm happy to answer any questions if members have them. We set out the timetable in on the final page of the agenda in Appendix 3. It is quite a compressed timetable. We have to carry out consultation. But at the early stage, there's a preliminary stage where we will offer briefings for existing parish councils to explain the process, and I will also intend to hold a briefing for members so you can understand that process as well in more detail. So whilst you may not have all the answers here, if you do agree to that community governance review, I would propose that we also have a briefing with you as well, so I can explain that process in more detail. The recommendations in relation to community governance review are G to J on your agenda on page 5.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I have been a member of this council since 1999 and was elected with many of you who are sat here this evening. I am somewhat saddened that our differences over LGR have extended beyond this chamber where we conduct council business. It is no secret that the Conservative group has a deep division over LGR. I am certain, however, the intentions of all who are present this evening want what is best for those residents that elected us. Mr. Mayor, none of us know what tomorrow will bring. However, what we do know is the Secretary of State has made a minded-to decision to support the Future Dorset proposal that lies before him. He has also stated that he is prepared to consider alternatives and confirmed that any change to council structures should be led by local councils as well as being supported by local residents. To this end, I believe it only right that residents who elected us should have their say. Mr. Mayor, if it is the wish of our residents to move forward with the Future Dorset proposal, then that's what we should do. However, if it is the wish of our residents not to agree with the Future Dorset proposal, we should make every effort to provide an alternative proposal to the Secretary of State during the time constraints that he has imposed, including talking to our neighbours in Hampshire and New Forest. Mr. Mayor, because of these time constraints, I am concerned that if a poll results in favour of LGR, there is consensus to establish a future town council. The order of process is covered in items G to J of the recommendation, which has just been explained to us by the officer. One thing that does concern me is the loss of whatever the decision of our relationship, friendships and achievements that have been made with our partners at East Dorset during our partnership working. Mr. Mayor, I have thought long and hard regarding the commitment of funds to this referendum, and I believe that it's such a major decision for the future municipal arrangements for Christchurch that residents should have their say. I therefore formally propose the recommendation as set out before you this evening, and I understand that the Deputy Leader will second my proposal. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Flagg. Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor and members, I'm very happy to second the Leader's proposal, as I too believe we should listen to the voice of the residents and then move forward on this very emotive matter that is going to affect the lives of all of us in Christchurch, whichever way the vote goes. Mr Mayor, it's been a very difficult time for all of us, causing divisions in this council that I've never seen before. But I'm sure that whatever our personal views are on LGR, we will do the best we can for our residents. Mr Mayor, by seconding this proposal, I trust that whatever the outcome will be, we'll be able to work together again for the residents of Christchurch. I therefore formally second the proposal as set out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Are there any questions to the proposer? Or any questions to the officer? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Members, it's purely a question that's been raised with me by some of my residents, is actually, could the validity of this poll be challenged because it's a reactionary poll? It's reacting to the decision that's been made rather than having been made before the decision, so it was more of an open poll.
Mr Mayor, can I have a stab? I think, members, as important as I know many of you feel about running a poll, we need to remember that it's not a binding poll, it's an advisory one. So the council will clearly be interested if it goes ahead and what the result is. And I believe it's your intention, if whatever the result is, that you will form that into some sort of representation to government. So it's important, clearly, but it's not legally binding. So therefore, and as you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I can't see how it could then be legally challenged.
Thank you. Councillor Bath.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Another question about the consultation process. Could I ask the officers, the original consultation that was done by OCR, has that been legally challenged with regards to the future Dorset proposal, or where do we stand with that situation with regards to the consultation that went out to our residents earlier on to find out what they thought about future Dorset proposals?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm not aware of any legal challenge to the public consultation work that was carried out by ORS.
Councillor Spittle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In view of the statement that said we are actually contacting our neighbours to the east, Hampshire Council and also New Forest, will the referendum paper include a question regarding that contact?
What statement was that?
No, as the leader had said that he was, and also in the Echo, he stated that he was be writing to New Forest and Hampshire. So I'm slightly confused that in view of that, of what he has said, but there is no reference to that proposal or that suggestion in the papers that we have in front of us that are due to go to the printers tomorrow.
I believe that wasn't a statement that Councillor Flagg made. It was a suggestion more than that he would be contacting our other neighbours to advise us whether they would like this council to join New Forest. Well, Hampshire County Council. Are there any further questions? Councillor Bath.
Sorry, in that vein, Mr Mayor, if the leader is going to be making representations to Hampshire County Council, does he require a mandate to do so from this council? Because at the moment we haven't actually given a mandate as such, for him to go to Hampshire County Council to have discussions. So is that required for him to be able to go to Hampshire and debate it with them on our behalf?
Thank you. Any further questions to the officers or leader? The move to debate those.
So to respond to that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just with respect to Councillor Bath's question, what I understood the leader to say in making the proposal is that whilst the poll was conducted, it would make sense to continue discussions with other councils, including those in Hampshire, and then depending on the outcome of the poll, the council could perhaps act accordingly. Clearly, if there were any suggestion that any of those arrangements should be formalised in any way, then the council would have to make a resolution. But as I understand it, and the leader is welcome to contradict me, that at the moment these are sort of exploratory discussions and no more than that.
Any further questions? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can't believe I'm the only person. I was going to keep all the list of names, but I seem to be first. The local poll was agreed in March, and the Secretary of State made his decision 8 months later. And now we must do the local poll. I think we've committed ourselves to it. And in my view, which is very brief, we must let the people of Christchurch speak.
Any further speakers? Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I fully support the referendum going out to our residents. I think it's very important that our residents do make the decision. Mr. Mayor, the Secretary of State has made a minded to decision, which, in my opinion, was against the wishes of this council and our residents. In my opinion, Bournemouth Council will swallow us up, and we all would have a minimal amount of councillors who would be able to support the interests of Christchurch residents. The Secretary of State has stated he would accept modifications to his minded decision. Our leader, through negotiations with a group of county leaders, has managed to establish an agreement for 2 seats. This modification, in my opinion, is far better than going into Bournemouth. Many thanks to our leader for doing this. I do not support going into Bournemouth because, in my opinion, Bournemouth Council has made financial mistakes, which I believe has cost the council taxpayers millions of pounds. For example, the failed reef at Boscombe and the demolition of the IMAX building. Also, in my opinion, it's rather foolhardy to close public toilets in a prime holiday resort. Definitely not for us. I do not like, Mr. Mayor, though, the format of the referendum because it contains, in my opinion, incorrect financial figures. It's based on the financial assumptions that may have happened, not hard facts. This has changed drastically by the much shorter time for harmonisation of the council tax. If a new authority set a new level of council tax on day one, the financial figures would even be more inaccurate, causing more confusion for our residents. By sending out the referendum, our residents will be given the chance to express their preference of joining Poole and Bournemouth or keeping Christchurch as a sovereign council. That is why I would support sending out the referendum. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further debate? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a couple of comments really that come off the back of what the members just said. Firstly, he stated that the leader has agreed to a modified version of 2C, not something I'm aware of, and if he has, then why are we debating 2B? And the other comment I had to make was actually where he was concerned about being swallowed up by Bournemouth. If we go in with Hampshire, we would probably have 3 councillors out of a total of 81. That is far, far less representation than we would have if we were in with Bournemouth and Poole.
think I saw Fred.
Can I ask the leader to clarify that statement that he made?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Myself and the Deputy Leader were invited to a meeting with the leader of Purbeck and the leader of East Dorset District Council. In those discussions, those two leaders felt that the best option to go forward would be option 2C. I received a phone call this afternoon from the leader of East Dorset District Council to say that neither of those councils have received a mandate to move forward on 2C, so it's no longer on the table. And so I'm sorry that if Councillor Hall got the wrong end of the stick there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My feelings are about the 60,000 that our taxpayers would have to pay. And if I felt it had been a bearing on the SOS second-minded 2 decision, then I would support the referendum. I'm concerned about the timescale, especially being over the Xmas period. However, I have researched the World Wide Web, which is not going to cost 60,000, and I've found a company called 38 Degrees that will do the poll for nothing. They do all political polls, and it is probably worth, I've got all the information on it, and I don't know if this is any information for you, but it is a very up-and-coming poll, and it's all on the website. It deals with lots of political reports, and it's an independent, people-powered company from the government, political parties or big businesses, and are funded by lots of members, probably costing about £5 a member to support a big referendum that they do. And if you look on the website, there is actually a lot of referendums, big referendums that they've done for the government. So it would save our taxpayers £60,000 to do this. I have all the information.
Thank you, Councillor Grace. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was reading the statement from the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, and the two major things which stand out from his statement are that further steps are needed to secure local consent, so that needs to be evidenced. And then secondly, he is open to any council in the area to come forward with alternative proposals or modifications. I would support a referendum because clearly this would give the views of the local residents. Similarly, whatever the outcome of that referendum, moving to parts G to J about community governance review, it makes sense to move forward with that task and finish group. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watts.
Oh, it was Margaret.
With the
Sorry.
greatest respect, Your Honour, I'm not indicating to speak. I do believe my colleague Margaret Phipps is indicating.
I saw the hand lady. Okay. Councillor Phipps.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As has been stated, this council has already democratically voted against joining a unitary authority with Bournemouth and Poole. And this council already voted in March to hold a referendum to ask our residents whether they think our decision was right. We're currently within a process where this council is being forced to join a unitary authority that actually voted against joining. Therefore, I do believe now is the time to ask the electorate for their views. The recent announcement from the Secretary of State, although minded to approve 2 unitaries across Dorset, was clear on other issues. He says he understands that the councils are now part of joint committees. However, further steps are needed to secure local consent. As I see it, the referendum will provide local consent, one way or the other, for Christchurch to join with Bournemouth and Poole or not. I just wanted to say as well that you probably know, I'm sure you do, that our Christchurch MP last year called an end-of-day adjournment debate in the House of Commons. It was actually last December. And I just want to tell you, quote actually from Hansard, what the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government said. The right approach to any reform of local government is bottom up. That is how councils figure out what is right for their areas and come up with locally driven solutions. It is the approach that underpins the provisions that the House considered some 12 months ago in what is now the Cities and Local Government Devolution Act 2016. And it is the approach that we are following for the purposes of both devolution and governance changes. This referendum will be democracy in action. It will be local, and it will provide an opinion from the bottom up, from the residents of this borough. So I say, let's get on with it. I want to find out what the Christchurch residents really want. Do they want us to join with Bournemouth and Poole, or don't they? So I support the recommendation.
Councillor Spittle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, again. This is going to be an interesting debate tonight, although it seems as though it's going to be possibly fairly short, unless people disagree with me, which often happens. There's a considerable amount of talking and also action outside this chamber regarding not only the referendum, but also local government reorganisation. And some of the residents are becoming slightly confused or annoyed at the actions that they are perceiving, particularly as we have started negotiations or discussions with our neighbours, Bournemouth and Poole, in accordance with 2B. And last night, other Dorset authorities commenced discussions in accordance with 2B. Why are we muddying the waters and trying, firstly, to hop across the border to Hampshire purely on what I regard as nostalgic grounds? In some ways, I thought this was a good idea when it was expressed to us at what I thought was a confidential meeting, but obviously the statement in the Echo gave us the other impression. The county of Hampshire and us have moved considerably forward since 1974. I was going to mention 2C, but that has already been that has been put back into the melting pot, or taken out of the melting pot. The option 2B, may I remind members, was the original choice made expertly from chosen residents from the ONS survey months ago. I know that there's no doubt I'm going to start a certain councillor wanting to disagree with me, but it's also the option recently minded to by the Secretary of State. How long is the patience of our neighbours going to last, and our sensitive relationship sour at any discussions? Already, there are rumours that leaflets and other material extolling the benefit of 2B are being prepared. There is also a new Facebook page. Yes, Christchurch, and I recommend that members actually look at that. Also, how long will our officers tolerate this uncertainty? And how long are the electorate who voted for us going to tolerate this constant indecision? So I leave it with members to decide tonight. Please refrain from any further pointless discussions and actions. Be man enough or lady enough to accept the decision and resurrect the dignity and reputation of Christchurch. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As always, I've listened to a very shortened debate, and I'm gravely concerned and worried as a councillor because we're missing something. We're missing something so fundamental that nobody has actually spoken about it. So I feel I must mention it. Put in your diary the 3rd of May 2019. Dorset County Council will no longer exist. Where are the services for our elderly, our disabled, our children, our families, all going to come from? We have no backup plan. We have nothing in resilience whatsoever to provide these essential services for our residents. We have nothing at the moment. We are talking about having a referendum. It's going to go one way or the other. We are doing nothing to talk to other people about securing the services. 6 councils have decided that they have a direction. We have stuck our heads in the sands. We are doing nothing. We should be disgraced of ourselves for doing that. We should be talking to our neighbours. We should be organising things. We should be having a seamless authority coming into power to take over these services, members. Please, will you wake up and smell the coffee or the tea, whatever you're drinking? I'm really, really, really upset that we're worried about a debate. We're worried about a referendum. It's going to go one way, and whether we listen to the people or whether we don't. But we're not doing the thing that we were sent here to do, and that's look after the people and maintain these services. We're doing nothing. We need to get on with the thing we were sent to do here to do, is look after the people. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hallam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, a little bit like my colleague over here, I believe that this is all about Christchurch being able to support and afford the services, that we've had the luxury of having now, and also what we actually want going forward within the future. And we have to try and work towards a suitable solution for everybody. For our residents, we are residents as well as members. So we're trying to find something that is suitable for everybody, and it is a very difficult situation that we're in. However, we have an opportunity to work with our partners in Bournemouth and Poole and to come up with a suitable solution and a way forward. I don't personally believe that the referendum is the way forward. I don't think it actually bears any weight, and for me, I feel that it is a waste of taxpayers' money, I'm afraid. Yes, we really want to understand, how everybody feels, and it would be great if we really felt that it would have a bearing on the Secretary of State. However, I don't believe that would be the case, so I'm unable to support, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to cover 2 things, actually. First, I'd like to cover the referendum, and then Hampshire, because the leader in his opening address did mention Hampshire. In relation to the referendum, I cannot support the need to spend at least £60,000 on a referendum which will have no legal standing and will not be supported by evidence, but rather an expression of interest alone. The Minister will, of course, consider all representations in the round and will give them the weight he considers appropriate in reaching a decision about the future structure of local government across the whole of Dorset and not just Christchurch. It's my belief that taxpayers are more interested in how much council tax they pay and what services they get for their money, not how the council is structured. However, a decision has been made about this council's future, and a survey carried out last year by ORS clearly showed that a majority of Dorset's councillors, councils, residents and business representatives were overwhelmingly in favour of one coastal urban council consisting of Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, and a rural council for the rest of Dorset. Now, bearing in mind the Secretary of State seeks responses by the 8th of January, some 7 weeks hence, the holding of a referendum at this late hour would, in my opinion, be a waste of time and ratepayers' money. Now, if I may, just briefly, I'd like to talk about Hampshire. At our group meeting last Monday, some members decided to support our local MP in his attempt to move Christchurch out of Dorset and into Hampshire, rather than accept the future Dorset plan for reorganisation. You will recall that this borough left Hampshire after the boundaries change in 1974, some 43 years ago. Joining Hampshire with their well publicised and published problems would push decision-making to Winchester, where we would be small fry compared to the existing population and communities of that county. The future Dorset plan offers a steady reduction of council tax in real terms over a period, and decision-making more directly influenced by Christchurch councillors and others who are extremely familiar with local issues than the good citizens, shall we say, of Aldershot, Andover, Basingstoke, Portsmouth, etc. Thoughts of moving back into Hampshire cannot surely be in the interests of the electorate of Christchurch. It is my opinion that the best way forward would be to combine with Bournemouth and Poole and give Christchurch considerable influence over what happens in this borough, which will show that this council cares for its inhabitants by making decisions that will be for the benefit of them all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just like to raise the point that this council has already voted to retain a two-tier system. That was part of the debate that we had earlier on in the year. And I think the issue with members may be getting confused about is in Bournemouth, as a single-tier system, we would no longer have control over things like planning or licensing, which we currently do now, and we would do if we retained a two-tier system. The Hampshire issue is if Bournemouth and Poole are a unitary and the rest of Dorset is unitary, we wish to retain a two-tier system, then the opportunity to do that could be in Hampshire, because Hampshire is a two-tier authority. So whilst it is remote in Winchester, as at the first level, the second level is would actually remain here with us. So that to me is sufficient reason for us to support the referendum, to find out what the community want. And I'm a bit sort of perplexed that councillors in this chamber do not want the community to have their say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Bungie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The councillor said people are more interested in how much they're paying in council tax. Well, a little bit of information. Hampshire, Band D property, pays nearly £200 a year less in council tax than we do in Dorset. So that is a financial incentive if that's what people are really interested in. We talk about democracy. Well, a famous person, I can't remember who, said democracy has a cost. And indeed it does. And we're saying the cost here is £60,000. We're saying about democracy, 289 people out of a population of nearly 50,000 in this borough said they wanted to go into Bournemouth. Is that democracy? I don't think so. So we need to hear from the majority of the population. And it's been mentioned about being outvoted in Bournemouth. The joint committee that we attended was an eye-opener. And if you counted up the numbers, even with Poole and Christchurch voting together, they would still be outnumbered by Bournemouth. And so that is the scenario for the forthcoming unitary authority should we go into it. Because even worse, if it's based on population, we would have 6 councillors on approximately 58, I think the calculation was. So that is hardly, again, having a strong voice in the new unitary. So yes, I have concerns. I'm not happy with the document that is going out, because I was on the task and finish group that went through it. We made some alterations, and we were under the impression that it was coming back for a second look at, so we could dot the I's, cross the T's, and maybe adjust it a little bit more, but it never did. So I'm not happy with the document, but I think the way we are at this stage, we have to go ahead with it. So I will be supporting the motion tonight that this goes out for a vote. And if the vote comes back that 50% of the people in Christchurch want to go in Bournemouth and 20% want to stay as we are, so be it. That is democracy, and I will have to live with that. But if 60%, 70% of the people come back saying they don't want to go in with it, then I hope the other members that keep rabbiting on about the other option will then come behind us and help us find a solution and a way forward. And services, yes, they do need to be looked at. But I suggest you talk to people that deal with Bournemouth social services and see how they feel about the way they get treated. There are problems in all authorities with social services, but these are not being discussed. These haven't been discussed in any of the consultation documents. When the ORS put out their consultation document, I asked the question, why are we not talking about social services and how that's going to be handled? Why are we not talking about refuse collection, how that's going to be handled? All the things that are everyday options for people that live in this borough, they're not talked about, they weren't in the document. So yes, I have concerns, but I think we have to go forward with this document as it stands and get a definitive answer. Then we can go to the Secretary of State and say, this is your answer, and these are our alternatives. And I hope the whole council will get behind the leader to find those alternatives if the answer comes back no. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the public, I sometimes wonder if we're living in parallel universes. I think this even more tonight when I hear some of the speeches made by my colleagues. Democracy. Well, is democracy getting a result from just over 300 people? We know that some of the discussions that were arranged, people went in with one view and somehow or other came out with another. Well, that's water under the bridge. What we've got is a decision that this council took. It's council policy. It's not a new thing tonight. It's council policy that we have a referendum. And we are here surely to abide by that policy, to show the people of Christchurch that we mean what we say. We sat in this council chamber, we debated at great length, and the decision of the majority was that there should be a referendum. Tonight, we are, if you like, cementing that decision. When those people up there were sitting in whatever council chamber or meeting place that they had, whether it was in the porch of the priory or wherever, they were putting the interests of the people of Christchurch first. They were also ready to be flexible. I might remind some members that actually, until we get just on the end board there, that they were all in Hampshire. We didn't move out of Hampshire because we wanted to.
we were put out of Hampshire. Hampshire was regarded as, if you like, being able to lose us to a county that needed our money. And so we were put into Dorset, and I hope we established a good working relationship. But before us tonight is really this question of, do we stand by a promise? I was involved, as many members were, in 3 elections this year, where people went from door to door to door. And the question on people's lips were, when are we going to have our referendum? When are we going to have our say? Since those elections, you can go to church, you can go to the supermarket, you can go to the local shop, you can walk the dog or let out the cat, although not in our case. But the question is, when are we having the referendum that you promised us? And Mr. Mayor, I submit that we gave a solemn undertaking and we must abide by it. I agree with Councillor Hilliard, who says that this statement from the Secretary of State is not as straightforward as some would have it. He does say there should be consent shown. And this is up to us and the referendum and what follows to provide him with the evidence that he wants.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I've listened quite intently this evening, and I think a lot of people have mentioned the £60,000, but if you actually nail that down, you're talking about just over £1 to find out what the residents of this borough want. And if it's their wish that they want to say what they want to do, then we should allow it. We've already agreed that we were going to go for a referendum, so it makes very little choice to actually say we can't do it, because it's literally just over £1.
Thank you, Councillor. Chief Executive, you want to come in?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, just for allowing me just to clarify a couple of points. I said in my introduction and prompted by a previous question that you need to bear in mind that this is not a binding poll. Okay, you're perfectly entitled to run it if that's what you choose to do, but one of you in your comments in the debate said that it's important that residents make the decision. So let's just be clear that it won't be a decision that's made by residents. It won't be a decision that's made by this council, actually. It will be a decision that's made by the Secretary of State. Okay. Now, you might wish to inform him with the results of the poll. You're perfectly entitled to do that, but I just emphasise that point. It's not a referendum, and we're purposely not calling it a referendum tonight. It's called a poll. Secondly, this issue about local consent, as some members have referred to, and it is open to interpretation, but it is one of the criteria that the Secretary of State will apply in considering any representations. As important as a local poll might be in this borough, you do need to see that in the context of all the other representations that will no doubt be made and have already been made, and other pieces of work and consultation, etc. So your poll, if you choose to go ahead, will be important to you, I know, but it will form a very small part of the consideration of the Secretary of State, in my opinion, as confirmed by discussions with DCLG. And lastly, if I may, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Grace raised an interesting point about a different way of going about this, and one that would be at much lower or if no cost at all. And we've, whilst you've been debating, we've just been having a look at the website that she referred to. It is a website that could be used to gather opinion, clearly, and there are other ways of doing this electronically. You're probably familiar with things like SurveyMonkey, that can be done at little or no cost. That particular website is a petitioning website, so there's no control on who could take part in that petition. And my understanding, based on your previous debate, is that you want this to be restricted to Christchurch residents, and you are particularly keen that in order to maximise the return that you might get, that it was a postal ballot. Okay. Now, the costs are estimated at 60,000 because we've had to assume what a turnout figure might be, and there isn't much information to go on in terms of these sorts of polls and getting a sense of what that might be. Clearly, we would want it, if it goes ahead, to be as high as possible. But just to give you a sense of the cost of the estimated 60,000, well over half of that is just the actual cost of the postage itself. So the sending out of the postal pack and the return cost. And then obviously on top of that, there's the administrative costs and other sundries and the like. So just to give you a sense of the scale of the cost. So I thank Mrs. Grace for her suggestion, because I'm always keen to see where we can save money, but I'm not sure that particular approach in this instance would fit the expectation of the members. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
John Lofts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Chief Executive used the words Christchurch residents. I had been quietly assuming to myself that meant people who were on the electoral roll. Are we talking the same? Thank you.
I believe we are, Councillor. Councillor Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I've listened to the points brought up, and quite frankly, I have been amazed by some of them, that people who are active in local government apparently miss some points completely. There is never any question that Christchurch will become a unitary authority in its own right. That has never been brought up, except, to be fair, in 1995, when that was a suggestion, and of course it failed. So somebody will be providing the services, the second tier, the first tier services, whoever it is. Hopefully it will not be a unitary authority of Bournemouth and Poole and Christchurch, but somebody will provide those services. If the Secretary of State, as he has left it open to do, revises his decision and says no, then Dorset County Council will not be abolished. Dorset County Council will go on providing the services that it does. Should we transfer to Hampshire, then Hampshire County Council will simply reverse the process of 1974, and we will be provided by our services, by upper tier services, by Hampshire instead of Dorset. So that bit of Project Fear we can forget about. What are we looking at? Mr. Mayor, the policy of this council, agreed in December 2016, was that we believed that the best outcome for this council would be no change. Our then leader and chief executive were mandated by that resolution to go away and argue for that. We now have the position that somehow all 9 leaders and chief executives agreed that option 2B was the best way forward. This council turned that down flat. We are not indecisive, Mr. Mayor. We are decisive. We do not want to be part of Greater Bournemouth. So,
Objection, Mr. Mayor. There is no such animal as Greater Bournemouth, and he knows it.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I did look up the word greater as applied to a town, And its geographical definition, I'm pleased to inform Councillor Davis, is the settlements and smaller towns surrounding a major urban area. And in that sense, Greater Bournemouth does exist geographically. So there is such a place, and I hope that I am now vindicated. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, we have had one or two other points here. It has been said that we want to we should look after our council tax. Well, yeah, option 2B means that my constituents in West Highcliffe and in Somerford will be paying more for 20 years if option 2B had been adopted in full to subsidise the provider of the IMAX, the Bank of Bournemouth, the Moose Shelf. Why should we? Now, further, we had one very interesting comment about the dignity of the mayoralty. There it is. I'm sorry, I was talking. Do you mind? Now, the dignity of this Christchurch. How you can get, Mr. Mayor, to say that we preserve the dignity of the borough by going on and basing ourselves before Bournemouth and saying, please take everything we've got. That's not dignity. That's surrender. What the outcome will be, we don't know. But we've touched on, as has been said, the Secretary of State's decision. And quite rightly, the Chief Executive says, this local poll will be a small part of the ongoing of the weight of evidence, but it'll be a large part affecting this authority. And the Conservative manifesto, as our MP, who has fought for Christchurch very nobly over the past 2 years, the Secretary of State has been reminded and has accepted and has been read out today, as a previous minister said, that no council will be forced to merge without its own consent. If we can find a way forward that will enable us to either find some way in which we can adapt to future Dorset, a modification, or we can propose an alternative option, which would mean us not being subject to Bournemouth at all, well and good. But if we refuse, if the evidence is that this council refuses its consent, then I do hope the Secretary of State, and I'm assured that this will weigh very heavily with him. And again, part of the problem here is that members have been talking to the politicians who make the rules, but others who've been talking to the civil servants who implement them. And that is half the problem, I think, in the misunderstandings that have occurred. Mr. Mayor, we have promised the people a referendum. We know it is not a binding decision, unfortunately. We know we can go out and we can make, and I'm sure we all will, campaign for what we want for Christchurch. And I look forward to that campaign as much as I have ever done to an election campaign. But this is about the future of Christchurch. It's about, does that line stop? Or can we go on as a borough? Can we go on and prosper? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Chief Executive, you want to come in? Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm assuming I am still allowed to speak, as my last points were both points of fact. I just wanted to make a few comments. I don't think any of us are against the people of Christchurch having a say. However, we are concerned about how effective this say is going to be. It's not a legal opinion. it would be nice for the Secretary of State to see what the local people say, but he doesn't actually have to put any weight on that at all. And that's the concern. The Secretary of State's words regarding finding and securing local support could be interpreted in a completely different way, in that there's a requirement for future Dorset to secure agreement from us, not for us to find support against 2B. I'm concerned about the validity. I'm concerned that a lot has been made about people using scare tactics. I'd just like to remind you that Christchurch residents have been told that they're going to be subsidising Bournemouth and Poole residents for 20 years. Members are very aware that this is not the case and is not what has been discussed in the joint committees. That time period has been reduced greatly. It's very clear that there's a lot of information out there that is coming from that is not fact, and that is still up in the air, and people don't necessarily know what the answer is. I think we need to think very hard before we run a poll to which we might get a result which will have no effect on what we want to happen.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further debate on anybody that hasn't spoken yet? Councillor Bath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, the leader made the point, and the deputy leader, that this has been a very divisive situation in Christchurch, and I think it's very sad that we are also divided. But also that is a reflection on how passionately we feel about our town and doing the right thing for our town and our residents as its representatives. To my mind, the one issue that doesn't seem to have been debated is the enormous elephant in the room, which is the deficit that we face. 74% of our local residents' council tax is not spent by us. It's spent by Dorset County Council. Dorset County Council has voted to go in with the Future Dorset plans because it realises, and obviously is very, very aware, that in the next few years, up to 2020, it faces a deficit of 26.9 million. Nobody who has spoken and said we don't want to do this and we don't want to go in with Bournemouth and Poole has come up with any suggestion as to how the upper tier authority is going to provide the current level of services to our residents, that it has this enormous hole in its budget. Dorset County Council provides the education for our children. It provides the roads and the infrastructure around our town. It provides adult social care and looks after the most vulnerable in our society. And it faces an enormous deficit. So to my mind, it's all very well going out to our people and scaremongering and saying we don't want to be taken over by the Greater Bournemouth Council. But what's the alternative? Where are we going to make those savings? How are we going to afford to provide good quality services to our residents? This is not about Christchurch. It's not about the mayoralty. The mayoralty can continue. We have within our papers tonight the ability for us to continue our mayoralty. It's not about wiping out Christchurch or what Christchurch is special in the history. It's about the structure of our democracy that provides services for our residents and being able to afford them. Christchurch that provides 11% of the services in the next 5 years has to make savings of £600,000. How are we going to do that? Are we going to do that by saying we don't want to do any of this? We haven't got an alternative. So going out to our residents is something I think is very nice. It's £60,000 of the money that we don't have to spend. But will it have an effect on what happens with the Secretary of State when he makes his second-minded to decision? We've had the ORS consultation. There was noise that somebody was going to challenge it and it was all rubbish and it shouldn't be taken into account. But there has been no legal challenge and it stands. And it represents the views of businesses and local people across the whole of Dorset. And it is on the Secretary of State's table as a matter of legal binding and a legal document. This poll, which is going to cost us £60,000, has no legal standing and I believe will give false hope to the residents who have been spun a story that we don't have to do anything and we can remain the same. We can't. We have to face the facts and we have to look at an ability to save money to provide services. And therefore, I cannot support the poll because I don't believe it will have any effect on the future.
Thank you, Councillor Bath. Councillor Nottage, you wanted to come in on the motion?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Members, it's my opinion and those of a number of my constituents that this council appears to have reached a point of desperation. Reorganisation of Dorset Council started some 3 years ago, reacting to the need to save over £100 million of taxpayers' money by 2025. And now, just receiving the Secretary of State in a Conservative government approval is in fact being further delayed in desperation and chaos. That which has been the subject to democratic scrutiny and resulting affirmation from the Dorset population is being held to ransom, partly, but mainly, because this council, and I quote from a spokesman, presumably with knowledge of the leadership, Christchurch is not a natural part of the conurbation. In this week, especially, has just seen just how far antagonists to change can go, spreading confusion and uncertainty to our communities and those that we are supposed to be in discussion with, having had a huge majority for change for a future Dorset, following the Conservative Secretary of State for Communities minded to decision to support such a direction. Mr. Mayor, when will this madness end? On Monday, we witnessed the spectre of a member of Parliament with no support from any other Dorset MP directing this separately elected council that should direct its future towards Hampshire in order to protect its independence and sovereignty. No financial work done, no discussions have taken place with Hampshire despite the decisions being able to be dealt with some over the last 9 months. But that the direction he instructs the elected council to take. And to that end, he will delay the consultation period until the end of January 2018. I hope he does not succeed. To my amazement, this move, supported by some members who related their personal experience in the 1970s of being employed by Hampshire in education, as if this has any relevance to the 21st century and the digital age. Just to make sure, he further indicates, I understand and have been told to the press, that he will consider a judicial review designed to stop any possible results from negotiations underway to form a brand new conurbation council, clearly described in the Future for Dorset, and which has been subject to scrutiny by the Department of Communities and Local Government. When asked his definition of sovereignty and independence, his retort was, CBC has control of off-street parking and planning. We are definitely in control of off-street parking, and what a good job we've done with it over the last few years, so I'll give him that. But planning, as we all know, planning is a quasi-judicial function with overall control, sovereignty, by the Planning Inspectorate, which we have learned to our cost very recently. Notwithstanding, he claims our independence will be enhanced and will be able to make a difference by becoming one of 12
district councils in Hampshire and being part of a population of between 1 and 2 million people. It's a bit like pouring a glass of coloured water into the Atlantic Ocean and expecting the ocean to change colour. So when, Mr. Mayor, will this madness end? Yesterday, out of the blue, another decision taken apparently unilaterally, which we heard tonight, to join Purbeck and East Dorset into the Dorset Unitary, despite the huge vote across Dorset for 2B. The leader decides that an independent Christchurch, with its so-called sovereignty, is not important after all. And obviously the prospect of a unitary is not as scary as being part of a brand new conurbation council. This against a government, a Conservative government, whose Secretary of State has issued a minded-to decision for the whole of Dorset and tasked this council to get his decision implemented. So, members, we are now a Conservative council at odds with a Conservative government. Not a good place to be. Mr. Mayor, I hope this madness ends soon. Otherwise, I can see us zigzagging into another cliff fall, this time with huge consequences in respect of our management reputation and our ability to provide ongoing services for our communities, especially those associated with children and adult services, and reaching far beyond our time. We really should be taking decisions ignoring our vested interests. Mr. Mayor, time is now of the essence. Whether it's this leader or some other leader of this council needs to stop this madness and start thinking of the future needs of the current communities and their children and grandchildren. At this point, I would say that I do agree with the council.
Ray, nearly there.
Thank you. I do agree with the council in respect of the efficacy of the poll contents. I'm very unhappy about it. I don't believe that if it's under inspection, it will give us any help whatsoever. Councillor, you had 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ray. Councillor Abbott.
Back to basics. We're hearing many ifs, ands and buts concerning the reorganisation. But this town's made up of real people. It's not our town, it's theirs. This belongs to the people, every single home in Christchurch. Every single home. This issue is going right into half and home with them. It's going to make everybody's lives different. The people are what makes the community spirit of Christchurch. It's the people. We're not pawns on the chessboard to be moved around by some distant bureaucrat that doesn't even know us, it doesn't know the people, it knows nothing about us. And I object to be moved around like a pawn on a chessboard. That's why I voted Brexit. So that's the reason I want to back the referendum. We have to know what every one of those people want with their lives. We're moving people's lives around here. We have to know every single person that we can get a hold of. Would you like this or wouldn't you like it? And there's no other way to do this except to have a referendum. So I back the referendum, and I'm not a pawn.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lofts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say something in response to just a little bit of what Councillor Nottage said. I've been involved in education for the past 27 years, I think it is. Perhaps that's why I look like I do. But the mechanics of education in our area is exactly the same as it was in 1974, particularly the catchment areas and most of the other controlling mechanisms, which are, I think I'm right in saying, the responsibility of Dorset County Council, but as long as they stick to those mechanics which were set up at that date. So it's amazing how things sometimes keep going in spite of what anybody else says. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Nottage you were mentioned? Only on that point.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I defer to the councillor's long experience in education, but perhaps I could just remind him of something which is very dear to my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, I was born in London during the war, and I first went to school in 1945, and I went to a very good school. It was clean, it was warm, we had teachers that would actually teach us. They looked after us in the holidays in the playground. Compared with 2012, in the 21st century, that we are educating our children in Christchurch in Portakabins. And I say it quite clearly.
On a point of order.
Right, thank you. Yes, thank you, David. Okay,
Mr.
David.
Mayor, Standing Order 1427. A member may make a personal explanation at any time. A personal relationship may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member that may appear to have been understood in the present debate.
Thank you, Councillor, for that knowledge. Are there any further speakers who have not spoken? Then the Chief Executive wants to... Sorry, Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the public, I wasn't in this chamber in March when the decision was taken to hold a poll to ascertain the views of the people. I'm not sure that I would have agreed with that, because I know I wouldn't have wanted us to spend the money on a poll. That at that time, I didn't think we had a chance of actually changing the mind in any small way of the Secretary of State, however many people within the borough voted on that poll, whichever direction they went in. I'm certainly well aware that the majority of residents in this borough do not want to be joined up with Bournemouth and Poole. And over the years, every time the subject has come up, as far as the government has been concerned and reorganisations, the people of Christchurch have said no way. And I myself was one of those people, long before I was a councillor, that was saying, no way do we want to be joined with Poole. But Mr. Mayor, I believe a decision was made in this chamber by this council in March. And that decision was to have this poll so that all the people could have the opportunity to speak. Because of that, because of everything that's been said tonight, and because of that little chink that the Secretary of State has given us in his minded to reply to us, I think there is no way we can disappoint the residents of Christchurch by not having that poll. So, Mr. Mayor, at this stage, I think we ought to thank the leader and the deputy leader for all the work they've done so far on this, of the time and effort they have spent in talking to Bournemouth and Poole, going along to the meeting so that we were actually sat at the table and could hear what they were saying, in the hope that we will be able to have some influence if things go in that direction. He has also talked to the leaders of Purbeck and East Dorset. Excuse me one moment, I'm going dry.
he came back and reported to us the suggestions of the two other leaders and deputy leaders. Some of my colleagues here tonight seem to have taken that as the leader and deputy leader agreeing to other people's suggestions. I'm quite sure he did not agree. Neither of them agreed to those suggestions. I'm sure they listened to what was said and came and reported back to us. So I thank them for that. I also thank them for what they have done as far as discussions with Hampshire County Council and New Forest Council, those discussions that have taken place so far, and everything that's obviously going to come in the future because of the position we've all been put in. So, Mr. Mayor, it's for those reasons that I will be supporting the recommendation before us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more debate? You've spoken.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, but other people have spoken 2 or 3 times. I've spoken once.
I've got the record here.
And it's a matter of some figures that were given that are inaccurate, which I would just like to clarify.
I think those will be by the Chief Executive.
Mr. Mayor, I'm confident that no member has spoken twice in the debate, other than the ones that have been referred to. Some members asked questions in the middle of the debate and then later had the opportunity to contribute to the debate. Thank you.
I think, Mr. Mayor, the problem is that figures have been quoted which are misleading, and members here and people sitting in the audience listening could be misled by them, and I think that is a serious error.
You want to comment? You want to comment? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason that I asked for the opportunity to say something, Mr. Mayor, was in relation to this Hampshire issue. But just on the point of information, I'm sure Councillor Bungey is right that some of the information that has been mentioned tonight is inaccurate. And that has been a feature of your debates for the last year on this subject. And what I would hope is, as we get to the sharp end of this debate, that we might focus on the facts in order that you come to an informed decision. It's my role to try to help you to do that. And I've sat here for many hours in your LGR related debates and listened to all sorts of things that be said. And I know they're often said with passion, but they're not always accurate. So my request is that from here on in, you do everything you can to base your comments and decision making on fact. The issue around Hampshire isn't on your agenda tonight, so I've left my comment about that right to the end. The Mayor and I did have a quiet debate in the middle to wonder whether that should be allowed to happen, but the leader did refer to it in his opening remarks, and clearly it is a topical issue, and it seemed reasonable in the context to let you make some comment. You do need to remember that if the leader is successful in his endeavours with Hampshire County Council in that informal sense, and something is worked up from there, that whatever that is has to be, in the words of the Secretary of State, compelling in order for him to want to know more about it. Okay, and you don't have very long. Okay, so you don't have to produce the weight of evidence that's currently on his desk from Future Dorset, because that would be unreasonable in the timescale that exists. But you would have to, I would suggest as a minimum, and this is based on advice from CLG officials who so far their advice has come to pass, actually, that you would have to secure the consent of the other councils' involvement to the extent that you could work up some proposal, and that you would have to in some way demonstrate that that proposal would be to the benefit of local government, not just in Christchurch, but in the area affected. Okay, so this is a large piece of work. Okay, it doesn't have to be done by the 8th of January, but it has to be done sufficiently well by then. And this applies to any other modification or option, not just the Hampshire one. So my word of caution is that when a member says that the Hampshire option can be achieved by simply reversing the process it took place in 1974, that is a massive understatement of what can be done. And I caution you, because as Councillor Bungie says, now is the moment to get focused on the real situation that the council finds itself in. So I suggest to you, Mr. Mayor, that should the leader get some traction with other councils about other options, that officers provide advice by way of a report about how those things might be taken forward, and then you can have the appropriate debate at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. There doesn't seem to be any indication for further debate, but any member?
Mr. Mayor, I'd still like to make a point of clarification on the finances that were quoted earlier, which were incorrect and misleading. Our finance officer had a meeting with members and gave us facts and figures up to the year 22-23, which are published, and they do not tie up with what was said earlier by one of the members about the deficit for the county, which was in fact by the year 22-23 27.4 million.
Colin, I'm sorry, but you're moving away from the motion and the debate.
Yeah, but the point is,
it's not
misinformation has been given. Nothing has been mentioned about the Poole and Bournemouth deficit of over 20
But Colin,
million.
we're not discussing that, are we? We're discussing whether we are going to go forward with a poll or not. That's what the motion basically saying. So I think, as there's no further debate, the leader.
No.
Did you want to come in, David?
Until he's asked for the vote.
No.
You want to...
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm content to go to the vote, but I would like my vote recorded, please, Mr. Mayor.
On that point, I think it's very important that for the members of the public and the residents of Christchurch know which councillors would like them to have a say, even a non-binding say, and which councillors would not like them to have a say. So if I take
Are you proposing or seconding it, David?
If Councillor Flagg has proposed a recorded vote, I will second it.
Fine. Those in favour of Right, we now go to the vote. Those in favour? Recorded vote.
So Richard's got to
That's over to me.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As members know, I will read out their names in alphabetical order, and if they could clearly indicate whether they're for, against, or wish to abstain against the recommendations, and I'm taking it, Mr. Mayor, that it's A to J inclusive.
Mr. Mayor, I think we should take the two issues separately, because there are two issues here. One is to do with the poll, and the other is to do with the community governance review. And so I would be, I think most members would like them to be split down the middle.
I'm happy to second that proposal.
Mr. Mayor, you don't need to take a vote on a recorded vote. You need a proposer and a seconder, which happened originally, and now we've had a suggested amendment to that recorded vote with a proposer and a second. So Richard is content that that's within the constitution. So I suggest to you that we go through the recorded vote procedure, and in the first instance you are saying whether you are for, against, or wish to abstain to the recommendation in relation to the local poll. That's recommendations A to F. Is that clear, Mr. Mayor?
That's good, yeah.
And then I'll move on from there. So on the recommendations A to F in alphabetical order, we start with Councillor Abbott.
Yes, I'm for.
And Councillor Bath.
Against.
Councillor Bungie.
For.
Councillor Davis.
Against.
Councillor Mrs Deadman.
For.
Councillor Mrs Darren Wilkes. Councillor Flagg. Councillor Fox.
Against.
Councillor Grace.
Against.
Councillor Geary.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hallam.
Against.
Councillor Hilliard. Councillor Colin Jameson.
For.
Councillor Mrs Jameson. Councillor Mrs Jones. Councillor Mr Jones. Councillor Lofts. Councillor Neal.
For.
Councillor Nottage.
Against.
Councillor Mrs Phipps.
For.
Councillor Mrs Smith. Councillor Mrs Spittle. Councillor Watts. So, Mr Mayor, on recommendations A to F, that's 15 for and 9 against, so carried. Shall I move on?
Yes, move on.
So, members, just to be clear, we are now moving to the recommendations that relate to the Community Governance Review. That's recommendations G through to J. And again, starting with Mrs Abbott.
For.
Mrs Bath.
For.
Councillor Bungie.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Mrs Deadman.
For.
Councillor Mrs Darren Wilkes. Councillor Flagg. Councillor Fox.
For.
Councillor Grace.
For.
Mr Mayor.
For.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hallam.
For.
Councillor Hilliard. Councillor Mr Jameson. Councillor Mrs Jameson. Councillor Mrs Jones. Councillor Mr Jones. Councillor Lofts. Councillor Neal. Councillor Nottage. Councillor Mrs Phipps. Councillor Mrs Smith. Councillor Mrs Spittle. Councillor Watts.
For.
If I didn't know better, Mr Mayor, I think some people just do that to make me read the names out. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much for a very well conducted debate. Thank you. I now close the meeting.
Mr Mayor, could I just ask a question? Could it be that when the postal ballots are returned, that members are invited to the opening of them?
They will be, Mr Mayor, and we will send information in due course about the detail of that.